Good morning, everyone. My name is Teresa Orton. I'm the director of the museum here. This is the Daughters of Utah Museum, and we would like to thank you and welcome you for coming to our third weekend event. Our museum was built in 1938 to house and preserve the artifacts and photos and histories of our early Washington County settlers. And so we have things in here that date from 1853 when they first settled Washington County until about 1900. So we'd like to ask you to come to the museum and stay after this presentation and wander through the museum and and enjoy those the things that we have on display for our collection. We are supported by funding from the St. George RAP Tax, Washington County RAP Tax, and funds from Utah Arts and Museums. So a little housekeeping. If you would please turn off your phone, which haven't done that yet either, but if you will turn off your phone, and then the restroom is just outside the door here if you need it. Today, our presenter is Kathleen Broeder. And there's so many things I could say about Kathleen. I've probably known her for about 15 years, maybe. Maybe all my life, I'm not sure. She has served on the board here for the Daughters of Utah Pioneers Museum Board probably 10 years at least. She studied at the University of Albany, New York, and Weber State, and then she started as a special collections librarian at the Dixie State University and was there for about 6-7 years, 8 years. And now she is the special collections librarian at Southern Utah University. She's married. Since I've known her, she's had a lot of life changes. She got married and she has 2 children. Yep. 2 little babies.
And the one crying in the background, that's mine.
And you'll meet him. Yeah, eventually you'll meet him. We're starting his education early.
We've never seen that woman before in our lives.
Anyway, we are so happy to have Kathleen here. She has a lot of knowledge regarding the history of education in Southern Utah. Kathleen.
All right, thank you so much. And I am so grateful to be here today. I am going to say I am an educator, so hopefully this is not just your same old boring history lesson, but there is going to be a whole lot of data and information thrown at you. So if at any point you have a question, you need clarification, just shout it out, raise your hand. I don't even care if you interrupt me and just ask a question out loud, okay? So I want to throw that out first. All right, so also because I'm a special collections librarian, I like to use primary sources when I talk about history, especially history of the area. So for this presentation, I looked primarily at items from the time period in which they were created. There's a couple of exceptions to that with some reminiscences and autobiography type. So those though, I'll still take because they were their own words. All right, so we're looking at education in territorial Utah, and just before we start, I kind of like to get a little bit of group input here. But what do you think of when you hear the word school? What do y'all think of?
Pencils and desks.
Pencils and desks?
The building.
The building? What else? Learning. The whole tests, yep. Part of the learning. Homework.
Book covers.
Book covers. Does anybody think of
School and how I dress as a little girl.
how you dress? Yeah.
Smell.
The smell. Yes, there's definitely a smell of schools. The smell you associate with schools is not the smell of territorial schools.
School lunches.
School lunches. And a lot of the things that we associate with school follow through, but a lot of them also don't come through in the territorial era. Because I can tell you that the smell, ventilation was a known problem. So probably not super great, right? So when I think about schools, I group it into 3 different sections, okay? So we've got the place, that's our building. That's the grounds, the playground, right? It's gonna be your benches, your desks, the apparatus around this place. There's also people. Do you have a school if you don't have teachers? Do you have a school if you don't have students? No, so they're gonna be there. Parents even come into play with it a little bit, right? And then we've got purpose, learning. Absolutely, learning is part of that. But how we set our curriculum is going to also be somewhat based off of the social needs of the time. It's going to be based off of, I hate to say it, politics. Have a pretty good influence on it, right? And also, especially during territorial, not so much now, but religion comes into play really heavily with education, okay? So I also want to take a moment and put this in context on what is happening on a national level in relation to Utah, because it actually comes into the story pretty drastically in how we see it change. So first, 1851, Utah's organized as a territory, okay? Yes, they've been in the valley up in Salt Lake for a while, but this is the official start of territorial moment, okay? And we have Brigham Young set in as governor. And while he's governor, we're also very heavily engaged with polygamy and being a theocracy, that religion and state are very intertwined at this very first inception of the territory, right? And have any of you heard the slogan, the twin relics of barbarism? Haven't? Okay, awesome, good to know. So in 1856, we have a major election. This is pre-Civil War, okay? So it really delves into that kind of moment. Does anybody know what the twin relics are?
Slavery and polygamy.
Yes, slavery and polygamy. Way to go. So proud of y'all. So this is the national Republican slogan for our presidential election. Polygamy is on the radar, okay, as an evil in the social US, okay? So the reason I bring that up is it's going to lead to a bunch of changes that happen within this state. So 1858, Brigham Young is removed as governor. There's a lot of tensions between federal government and territorial government. We also applied multiple times to become a state with our constitution, or with multiple constitutions. They're not ever accepted until 1896. But the 1882 one, they're starting to recognize that they're having to make changes in order to be more assimilated to the rest of the nation. If they want to be accepted, they have to play the part, right? And so they say, okay, well, we need to have some separation between the schools and between the state, or between religion, okay? It's not super big, but it's included now. Has anybody heard of the Edmund Tucker Anti-Polygamy Act? Yeah, okay, so we got several of you. So this is really just the government saying, okay, polygamy, more than one marriage at a time is illegal, and you can be prosecuted for it, okay? But the reason I bring it up when we talk about education is that in this one, it actually gets rid of the territorial superintendent and reimplants it. So like they're reshaping what that role is on a federal level to make it more mainstream American. But also they're saying, okay, at this point in this law, your stats that you keep about your schools, you can no longer say this student was Mormon and this student is Gentile. Does everybody know what the word Gentile means? Non-Mormon, yes, okay. And that your books, they can't be religious and taught in schools. So we're not going to use maybe the Book of Mormon anymore as a reader. So 1890, we have the end of plural marriage. And this is, again, part of becoming more standard American. Then we have an Enabling Act. And this one's actually kind of an interesting bill in which it says, okay, Utah, we are now ready to hear a petition for you to become a state. Like, you've had several failed ones. Let's actually see what we can do to get you forward. But in doing so, you have to put in a thing that says there's no church in your school. It's got to be free from sectarian control. And then in 1896, we get the Constitution that is ratified, approved, and gets us into the Union, okay? And in this, it has additional removals of church and state than was seen in the 1882 one. But also, I found this so humorous, you also have to teach the metric system.
Too bad that didn't stick.
So that's the politics that kind of tie us into the national scene. There's also, though, a social movement that starts in the 1830s, and it's for common schools. Has anybody heard the term, this common school movement? Okay, if you did, you were really history nerd like me, and I'd love it. Okay, so common schools is this idea that we ought to have state-supported schools that kids can go to. You don't have to pay tuition. That kids actually are expected to go to school, surprisingly enough, right? And that we ought to have teachers who are trained to teach. Because a lot of times it's just, I know a little bit more than you, so I'm your teacher today. Now, I have learned along with my students, and it is a little terrifying sometimes to lead the blind, or the blind leading the blind. So, I've got a couple of quotes up here, and these are both from biennial reports of the territorial superintendent. So this is the guy that's over the entire territory saying, hey, this is the state of our schools. And he's really hits on the main points of what, and I'm not going to read this, so if y'all want to read the quotes, feel free. Can you see them? I guess it's probably the first thing. If not, I will read them. Can anybody not see it enough to read? Okay. So really, Common School is about the idea that we need to have standardization in what it means to be a teacher and how to teach.
So a common school, is it fair to say that's a precursor to today's public schools?
100%, yes. Way to go. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And that's why this is such an important story, is because it's a precursor. And while this movement starting in the 1830s in the rest of the US, especially back east, we don't see it hit Utah until around the 1880s. So we're hitting this movement a fair bit later, okay? The other reason that we do it, though, is because there's this idea that if you're going to have a citizenship that is going to vote, very like back to the Republic, they need to be educated enough to participate in the Republic. And if you're going to be educated, you have to be able to go to school, okay? So then we're going to talk a little bit about some local influences. And these are going to be more territorial laws that affect just the territory itself. So in 1852, first year after being a territory, right, the legislature says, okay, courts, you get to establish your county superintendents. Superintendents, in turn, are going to be voted in by election, and they're responsible for making sure there's a school building, that it's maintained, that there is fuel, because remember, there's no central heating. You have to have coal or wood to burn, okay? They may or may not be in charge, though, of paying the teachers. That's not their job so much, but it is their job to collect taxes. And then we see in 54 that Cedar City actually passes an ordinance, and it divides their city into 4 wards, and each of those wards is going to be a school. So they kind of like, just like, yeah, this is where I mean, like, there's not really a huge separation between church and state. It's like, oh, we already have this church division, so we're going to use this for our secular as well, okay? In 1880, this is the first time that we actually see an age set for school children in law. Until then, it was like, yeah, you come when you come. And it's not until 1890 that they're actually like, okay, you actually have to have a butt in the seat. If we're going to pay taxes, you have to be there. Radical idea, right? And it actually is pretty because, as we'll see later, there's not really high attendance during territorial Utah, okay? All right, so religion comes into play in 2 ways. First, religion is like essential in how the settlements and the towns in southern Utah get settled. So we see the first one is in 1851 with Parowan, with the Iron Mission, and then, Iron County Mission. And then they kind of look around there and go, hey, there's some coal on Coal Creek, which is now in the middle of Cedar City. And so they moved down there by the end of 1852. In 1861, in October, the Southern Utah Mission is called, and they head down to St. George. Now, there's a lot of towns settled in between Parowan and St. George. I'm not really going to go into detail on that just because I cannot cram that many school buildings into an hour. Okay, so I'm really just looking at the 3 big settlements. There's Fort Harmony, there's Summit, there's Canaraville, like there's 17 different schools in 1880 in Iron County, and I think 12 in Washington County. So I'm only hitting a couple, okay? And also again, in this report from 1880s, we've got a quote up here that's basically saying that it is so important to have religion in your school to make a good, moral, learned people. So we're seeing some separation, but not a lot still at this point. in 1880, okay? So we're going to drop back a little bit, and we're going to look at place now. We've talked about some of that purpose and the context behind it. So now let's look at place. So we're going to look at first Parowan, then we're going to go to Cedar City, and then we're going to go to St. George, because chronological order makes me happy. Okay, so 1851, in January, they arrive in Parowan. And just so you know, when they're traveling, it is like below zero multiple days. It is cold. Like, I don't want to be outside in that weather cold, let alone traveling. So at first, they're really just settling in, figuring out where they want to put the town, where they want to put the fort, where can they get wood, because if it's that cold, what do you need first? Shelter. Yep, we need a place besides a wagon. And they get in there in about mid-January. And then by January 19th, and this comes from the Journal of George A. Smith. He's actually the president of the mission, okay? So in his journal, he talks about, okay, we need to pick out a building. We're going to put it in the middle of the fort, and it's going to be used for basically everything. And we're going to see this theme repeated. It's going to be a social hall. It's going to be a school. It's going to be a church. It's going to be a meeting council hall, right? It's everything all in one. And they're talking about this need for a school about a month or about half a month before they actually move into where they've actually picked out their plots and mapped out the town and where they're going to move to. So they haven't even started building homes at this point, okay? Now, I am going to read this quote because this is like the first discussion about having a school. So George A. Smith says, "We commenced building a wickiup with slabs and brush. I propose to the brethren that we start a school in the wickiup, providing they will help to finish it. One side of the wickiup was covered with 14 slabs taken from logs Brother Benson saved up for the mill." Do y'all know what a wickiup means?
Yeah, I was going to ask. Is it like a souped-up lean-to?
It's a brush lean-to.
Yeah.
It's going to be a couple of like sticks with willow leaves or brush just woven in between. Yep.
There are tribes that did that have wickiups.
Mm-hmm.
We need to try to find out.
I think it was actually fairly common, especially with Paiutes in that area.
Is that a Utah term or a
It's
Western
a
term?
wickiup is a native, I believe.
Oh, well, I knew it as a lean-to.
There you go, yeah. Okay, so looking at Parowan still, December 23rd of 1851, they have finished a schoolroom, but it's only 18 by 24 foot adobe building. That's going to be smaller than this room. That's the size of most people's bedrooms, okay? So it's tiny, but we've got children and adults who are going to attend. They have a few slates, just, you know, little bitty chalkboards that you use personal sized. And they've got 2 books, a copy of Robinson Crusoe and the Book of Mormon. All right, so we skipped one. We skipped a slide. And I want to come back to this one because this one actually, I think, is the funniest description of early school. So this is still while they haven't gotten any homes built, okay? So he says, "My wickiup is very important establishment. It's composed of brush, a few slabs, and 3 wagons. A fire's in the center, and a lot of milking stool benches and clogs placed around, 2 of which are cushioned with buffalo robes." So at least they have something for warmth. "To see my school, that's supposed to say cold nights. In February, scholars standing around my huge campfire, the wind is broken off by the brush, and the whole canopy of heaven is your covering." So there's no roof. We're open to the skies, right? "Thermometer is standing at 7 degrees. So one side is roasting, because we got the fire here, while the other side is freezing. So they're rotating the whole time in order to stay warm, okay? And I would share my grammar book, the only one in school, and would give out a sentence at a time and pass it around. And notwithstanding these circumstances, I never saw a grammar class learn faster for the time. So we've got one book, and it's like, okay, I read a sentence, we're going to pass it down, and we're just going to go around. It's going to take a while to learn to read, right? But considering it's 7 degrees below, they're doing it at night. Why would they be doing it at night? They're bringing in the logs from the mill to be able to build a log home. Yep.
Was there ever a fire? I
There's a fire in the middle to keep them warm, but it's a campfire.
But it never caught the structure on fire?
My guess is it's far enough around. Yeah. All right, so by the end of the year, they have the schoolhouse, and then it's about another 10 years later that they actually start building, and this is the Parowan Rock Church. It is still standing, so if you ever go up to Parowan, it's the oldest, right? It's the oldest pioneer structure from this time, for this area. So, and it takes, though, 6 years. It's not till the fall of '67 that the school is in good enough shape that they can use the first floor. They're not using the second floor because it's not done, right? But it doesn't matter. They're still moving in, and they're using it for school and other purposes. And then Parowan is the first one to actually have a stake academy. So most of your grammar schools are going to go up to no more than 8th grade. Academy is going to go anything past that, but not college, okay? And in some ways, I find this weird because we're like, oh, Parowan, it's such a small town. Except for at this time period, it and Cedar were pretty equal. There really wasn't a precedent of which one was bigger set, and Parowan is still the county seat.
Wasn't Salt Lake founded right around the same time, or maybe just slightly before? Wasn't it 1846 that the NOV mission went out to find?
Yeah, so they came in 47.
So in 5 years, they'd already moved down enough.
Yes.
Far south as Parowan.
Yes. And this is actually a bigger part of the story of Mormon migration and colonization. They purposely wanted to settle the entire area to claim it as their territory. Yeah. Okay, so switching over to Cedar. So Cedar starts in 1852, okay? And a lot of the information coming from this is going to be from Henry Lunt's journal, because he was actually set to be president for this mission, So on August 1st, he's like, okay, we need to start considering who would be a good trustee for a school. We're not actually deciding yet, but we need to start thinking about it because we haven't actually been moved to Cedar, okay? Then about a month and a half later, they're like, okay, we need to build that schoolhouse. Again, it's going to be a multi-purpose building, though, for dancing and all of that. And then December 7th, they start a night school. So they're working pretty quick, okay? And it's for the brethren and sisters. And we know who's the first teacher, which is kind of fun. But on the other hand, this image is of Sister, oh, what was her name? It's not Caruth, Kathleen, something like that. And on the bottom of this picture, it says the first school teacher. So maybe Brother Caruthers, thank you, Caruthers was called and never taught. I don't know, record's a little sketchy. So finding the first teacher, almost impossible, but also a lot of them only taught for maybe 1 year before they're like, nope, I'm out, okay? And I actually find this interesting that we have record that 238 school textbooks arrived in Cedar in 1852. There's first, second, and third readers, grammars, arithmetics, dictionaries, spellers. And I think spellers are interesting to note because at this point, spelling is not really standardized. And that's part of the Common School movement as well, is creating a standard way of spelling things. Parsing books, and for the advanced students, books on hygiene, chemistry, and philosophy.
What is a parsing book?
I think it's the way that it's like a dictation, like how you read and how you break up text when verbal.
That's an amazing shipment.
It is huge. It is huge.
Where did the shipment come from, do you know?
I do not know.
Like who sent it? Not geographically where, but
Nope.
who donated it?
My guess is that they bought it as a city to furnish the school. All right. And that's actually one of the things, it's a really good point, that makes it hard working with history. Because sometimes you know that things came through, but you're like, who paid for it? Where did it come from? What books did they get? I don't know. I can make a guess of maybe what types of books it would have been, but I can't say for certain. Okay? So looking at Cedar in a little bit later period, in 1854, they actually say, okay, state legislature said we can figure out what our school districts are, so we're going to do it. And again, they do it based off of the 4 wards. And then in 1862, they have an adobe social hall that they built, and there you're going to use it just like Parowan did, okay? The thing that's kind of interesting about Cedar is in 1881, they know they need a bigger school, And so they're looking around and they find a plot and they're like, this is the one I want. And if you've ever been to Cedar, there's a rock church that was built in like the 1930s. That's the same spot, okay? And I note that because when they said, hey, we want this spot, they went to George Wood, who owns it, and he says, okay, you can have it. But it can only ever be used for school or church purposes. So when the school was ready to be torn down because it was old, they were going to go sell it, and they're like, wait, we actually can't. And so they built a church instead. And then by 1883, in the county superintendent's report, he said every school, except one, is well seated with homemade desks and furnished with blackboards, charts, and maps. So your desks are one homemade, but wait, what is that one school using? I actually don't know, but I am very concerned for that one school. Also by the 1880s, there's actually a really good report in there, and it tells you what every city and township's school is like. So like they have 2 concrete schools. They have a couple of them that are, they have plastered walls, and at least one that is still just a log building.
Question.
Yeah.
Is the land that George Wood donated today still used for school or church purposes?
It's where a LDS rock church that was built in the 30s still stands.
That's good to know.
Right? They did honor it.
Okay.
And it's hard to tell, but this building here in the background is actually the school that they built in Cedar. I could not find a direct picture of the school. I found a picture of...
Standing in St. Rock Church.
Yeah, it's gone. All right, so moving down to St. George. So St. George is called as the Southern Mission, and by this time, like, there's already Santa Clara in place, Washington's already here, so they're calling St. George, and St. George is going to be the bigger community. They are calling 300 families plus instead of the 10 or so, okay? 10 to 50. So they get here, first group comes on the 25th, but the main group comes on the 1st of December into what will become St. George. And one of the things I find interesting, and the notes on this come from James Blake. He was the historian for the mission, so he has a really good record day-to-day account, okay? So he says on Christmas, it rained for 40 days straight. So pretty much since they got there, it's just pouring. And have y'all been here for a St. George rain in the middle of winter? It floods, right? And that's what happens. And I note this partly because Santa Clara has already been established, and he notes that the school in Santa Clara washes away. So how long is that school going? I don't know, but I know there was one, okay?
Harmony also washed away.
Yep.
The same flood.
Mm-hmm.
And then they moved to New Harmony.
That's right. Yep. There's a lot of changes right in there. Okay. So, and I wanted to point out that, like, in 2 days after Christmas, they're like, okay, we've chosen our school teachers. We're going to start organizing our schools. And we know that we have 103 to attend day school, which is going to be the kids and the youth, and 48 for evening school. So those are probably your older youth or adults. Because again, not every adult is necessarily literate at this point. All right, moving into 62, so this is just like a couple of days later. President Snow says, you know what, we need to make a public building, just like the other communities did. But we know we want to actually get what they call subscriptions, voluntary donations. Now, does anybody have money in hand at this point? No, they do not. So we have 120 people who say, sign me up. They estimate that the cost of the school is going to be between $3,000 and $3,500. And they get almost $3,000. They get $2,974. So pretty close. Now again, they're not giving this money up in front. This is going to be maybe in exchange with labor or product, like eggs or chicken or whatever they need in order to then barter and trade for more labor, okay? But that's how much they're saying they're going to give. But they're also going to build a bigger school. This one's going to be 40 feet by 21. So substantially bigger than what we saw built in Parowan. And they had the 4 wards, and I was actually able to figure out where those wards would have been. The star is where the Tabernacle and Main Street Park is, to help kind of orient yourself on that map. So in 1883, in another superintendent's report, he said, "I'm gratified to report that there's at least one school in good working order in each district under my supervision, including four in St. George. The supplanting of many old and much defaced desks and other furnishings of the schoolroom with others of more elegant and convenient style is strongly recommended." And I love this because in my head, I'm like, these are 20-year-old desks, and you know the kids are over here just like graffitiing the crap out of them, right? John was here. Because a lot of times I want to think like, oh, they're just so different. And then I'm like, no, there's so many commonalities though that I see, even though it's such a different time period.
It's surprising to me they even had desks.
I mean, they would have been homemade, and that's why they said a more elegant design. It was probably pretty rough. It was probably not comfortable to sit in the classroom for 6 or 8 hours.
One of your slides, about 2 slides ago, said that the subscribers, not one of these subscribers had a roof over his own head yet.
Yes.
I don't know if this is a silly question, but where did they sleep? Where did they live if there was no roof over their own head yet? In
Their wagons.
Oh, wow.
Yep. They stayed in wagons until they could build homes. And what we actually see, especially in Parowan, because I got a lot more into the record on that, is they stay in their wagons until they could build a log home, and then some of them within the first year, they move into the log home, and then they start building an adobe home.
So the school / social hall / church building came first.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is, I think, somewhat of a little known fact that St. George actually had an academy almost the same time as Parowan did, except for it didn't last. St. George Stake Academy, I know, was there as least as early as 1888. And this one, so I actually have a sample of a circular for the 4th year of its iteration. And this is actually from Utah Tech Special Collections, which is phenomenal. And it's really hard to tell, but like off to the right, it gives like the rules of the school. There's no profanity. Sorry, I can't see it. Let's see. No tobacco or strong drink. If you're going to discontinue, you have to like go to the principal in order to get excused. You don't get to just drop out. So there's a lot of like really interesting things. There's a bit about parents and guardians in there. So this doesn't last. It does kind of like fade out, and then St. George Stake Academy starts again in 1911. But that's after territorial, so we're not going to get into that too much.
So an academy in those days was a high school. It was from
8th through, yeah. Although I don't know that they really did grades per se after that. They did courses of study. All right, so let's talk about teachers. And as we're going into this common school movement, exams are becoming more and more important, because at the very beginning of the territory, you would go in and you'd talk to any one of the trustees sometimes and just say, hey, I want to be a teacher. And they could choose how to do it. And it could be one individual trustee that says, sure, let's test your knowledge right here, right now, and just spout some questions, and he'd be like, yep, you're good to go. Some of them might say, okay, well, let me get my other trustees together, we'll have a conversation and see if you test good enough. So that's very early. Do you think that leads to maybe some favoritism? How many of you think the trustees actually had the education in order to assess a teacher's education? Right? So there's some definite problems with this. And so that's partly why they're like, hey, common schools are really important. Let's normalize what does it mean to be a teacher, what's expected of a trustee, and all of that. So the report really is kind of hitting on that need to have a standardized test. And they want to actually propose a plan where they have 2 free tests a year in each county. And the county test should be like the same rigor across the different counties. Strange thought, right? And that it's a 2-day exam. I didn't even take a 2-day exam to get into grad school, y'all. A 2-day exam, like, that gives me anxiety just thinking about it. And as it should. So this is a woman named Maria Platt. She was a school teacher at several different schools. She moved around almost every 1 to 2 years. So I'm going to read this because I think this just like tells you about the test anxiety in so much detail. Okay, so at that time, if anyone could pass the county teacher's examination, they could teach school. So in August, we went to St. George to take the exams, and believe me, they were stiff. 3 days of hard work in every subject from A to Z. It was hot, and I wasn't used to it, so I suffered with a severe headache. Okay, so she's like up in the mountains, like Enterprise kind of area where she grew up, Ventura. So now she's coming down to St. George in August. What's the weather in St. George in August? Nobody wants to be here, right? Exactly. So I got a little sleep at night because of the heat. It's a wonder I had any sense at all. The last day, we had an extra stiff examination. It was an extremely hot day, and I felt I had not succeeded very well. Our last subject was drawing and nature. All sorts of things we had to draw, and all sorts of questions we had to answer about artists and nature. One of the questions was, and I find this hilarious, she remembers this question. It is like burned into her head, okay? Who was Edwin Landseer? Does anybody know?
What's the name again?
Edward Landseer. Edwin, yes. I don't know.
An artist.
It's an artist, right? What sort of pictures did he paint? Did they appeal to children? And if so, why? Like, that's a legit question, right? I studied the name. I was sure it wasn't German, French, or Italian, using some deductive reasoning here. So I decided it must be English, but I could not remember ever seeing his name in print or seeing any of his paintings. I was troubled. I felt that I hadn't done too well with the exam, and to fail meant disgrace to me. If I couldn't pass the examination, why should I be teaching school? I mean, that's kind of a legit question, right? But in some ways, this wait, if I can't pass the test, why can I teach school, is a very different mindset than earlier teachers had. Because there's an earlier teacher, Martha Cox, who is walking down the schools or streets in St. George, and there's a bunch of kids out playing hooky. She looks at them and says, "Hey, why aren't you in school?" They're like, "Yeah, the teacher's just as happy to not have us there." She's like, "Well, if I was your teacher, I'd want you there." And they're like, "Well, wait, why don't you be our teacher?" She's like, "Well, I don't know much more than you." And they're like, "Well, teach us what you know." So she went to the school district for her award, and they're like, no, you haven't passed the county test. She's like, "Well, you know what? I'm just going to set one up at my home." That's good enough, right? And the kids came. And then they got mad at her, and they're like, no, you can't have a school when we have a district school because you're still in our students. So they forced her to stop, and the other ward was like, wait, can we have her? That would be great. So she actually continues teaching in a ward school. And the reason this is so important is because it's actually not uncommon for what they call home teachers. Teachers who are teaching out of their home at the same time or side by side with the official school districts. So being able to teach and pass an exam wasn't necessarily super important at the beginning of the Terror 12 movement. We see it becoming more and more so.
So were these stiff exams modeled after maybe other exams in the States, or did the territory kind of have their own exam?
I honestly don't know. I spent a little bit of time trying to find one of these exams and wasn't successful, but I want to actually dig into that one more. My guess is they probably modeled them after some of the other states that already had a school exam for teachers in place. Because by this point, we're talking 1880s, a lot of normal schools were already in place. Normal schools are teaching education, or teaching schools for educators. So learning how to be a teacher is a normal school. So those already existed in a lot of places. So my guess is they're basing them off of those. All right, so teachers also don't get paid great. And it's also inequitable, both by gender, by location, okay? So Iron County, the men make 130% more than the female teachers. Right? So the first year, men made an average of 179. The second year, 192. Women made 78 and 83. Washington County, the men still made more, but not quite as much. And it varies between the 2 years. So in 1880, 104% more, 1881, 120% more. Men's ranges, though, is 276 to 352. Even the guys, though, are getting paid almost double what they were paid in Iron County. So it's not even just like location comes into play here. Women are making 125 to 173. So women in St. George's teachers made almost as much as the previous year Iron County men did. Now I want you to remember those numbers and that Iron County made less because they have more students than Washington County. Okay, so this is, sorry, I didn't put a name. All right, so this is from the superintendent's report, talking about inequitable pay and why it matters, okay? So in some instances, the fixing rates and the collection of tuition and fees was left entirely to the teacher. So the teacher gets to say, hey, this is what you're gonna pay me, and I'm actually gonna go out and collect it. Can you imagine going up to your students and be like, hey, I need $2 from you to keep attending classes? I would not want to do that as a teacher, thank you. The trustees taking little to no part in it, other than they give consent to be employed, okay? In other cases, the rate of tuition to be charged by the teacher were fixed by the trustees, but then the teacher had to go collect it. And in other instances, the trustees assumed the collection of tuition fees and paid the teacher a monthly salary. So that's probably explains in part why there's such a difference in pay between the two counties. Working conditions. This is Maria Platt again, and I'm going to read her words because it's very eye-opening, okay? So I taught in Enterprise then for 2 years, and this is the very beginning of Enterprise being formed as a city, okay? I had 52 students, all the grades. That's a big class. That's a big variation in grades as well. The schoolhouse was not finished. Just the bare brick walls with no ceiling except the rafters and one stove with a pipe running up through the roof. It was almost impossible to keep the room warm. And I had to let the children take turns sitting around the stove to keep warm. So we're not rotating on a spit anymore, but now we're playing like musical chairs just to stay warm while at school. Such conditions, as compared to today's advantages, one can hardly imagine. There were not enough benches for the students, so they brought in an old workbench for a desk. They made a seat out of an old plank. Some of the larger boys used this. My salary was $5 a month, and I paid my board out of it. And she goes on to tell that her board was $10. I don't know if it was a month or a year, but it doesn't work. And so she tells them that she has to supplement that rent with things like butter and pork or some beef and like in-kind trade because she doesn't have the cash to pay. And it's actually not uncommon at this time for part of your pay to be cash, part of it to be in kind as well. All right, so let's move to students. So with students, we see a couple of main things come through. One of these is very, very inconsistent learning. Now, these are actually reminiscence. These are people looking back at their life and describing it. So the first one comes from a newspaper, so it's third person. As a boy, Heber Jarvis' schooling consisted of 3 months under Orpha Everett, 3 months under Libby Snow, and 2 months under Lydia Crosby. Later, when grown to manhood, he attended one entire winter under Mr. Shopman, who taught in the basement of the Tabernacle. That's his entire schooling. Yeah, it's not a ton, right? Edward H. Snow says, I remember at Sister Snell's, we learned to spell words like incomprehensibility. But of course, we did not comprehend their meaning. Okay, so learning's not just inequitable in what they're learning and how often they're going to school, but also textbooks changed relatively frequently. Teachers changed. Every time a teacher changed, sometimes they would come back and put the kids back into the first level and make them take it over again because they didn't know where they were. So it's not like you naturally progressed, okay? So looking at some stats from Iron County, only 77% of children who were of school age were actually enrolled in school. Of those, though, only 66 and 62%, and I know those numbers are backwards, is because the first year and second year number, okay, actually attended school. So we're maybe half the population of students are actually making it to school. And that doesn't say how often they made it to school. In Iron County, they had 177 and 123 days in school. Now, if we look at Washington County, only 60% of their children were enrolled in school. And of those, 37 or 57% were actually attending. So much lower numbers in attendance, with a lot fewer days. They only had 93 or 108 days actually of school days. Now you remember though, which one made more money?
Washington.
They had fewer students and fewer work days. Sign me up, right? But they also report on the illiteracy rates in Utah from the 1880 census, okay? And they're relatively low numbers. And this is for anybody over 10 that can't read, is only 3.37%. Those who can't write, again, over 10 years of age, is 6.13. That's actually not low. Or that's pretty low, right? However, they mean just the ability to read, basic ability to write. We're not talking they're going to be composing essays or reading Shakespeare, okay? White illiteracy is somehow higher than those numbers, though. Not entirely certain how they got to those numbers, but it's higher. And then, so people of color, there were some African Americans, and there's also a lot of Native. So their illiteracy rates are much higher, which I would expect.
At this time, was Iron County actually bigger in population than Washington County? Is that why the number, was that actually considered the bigger, more cosmopolitan area? Is that why the, no, actually, I think I was saying it wrong. So Washington made more, but so was Washington less populated or more populated?
I don't know.
No.
I know Iron and Cedar would have been, or sorry, Cedar and Parowan would have been similar. Do you know?
So when you talk about Washington County, we're talking about what we consider the Washington County borders today?
1880s borders.
Yeah, 1880 borders and Iron County borders, and so it was different.
Yes, they are different than today.
There were, I think over Washington County had a higher population than Iron County did at that time.
Which was
Only because they did not settle to the west of Iron County like we did in Washington County.
Yeah.
And the river.
But I do know they had 17 schools versus 12. So Iron County had more. But some of those schools would have like 5 or 6.
Maybe more kids.
Iron County actually did have more school-age children. So I don't know if the population was bigger, but and this is the thing that gets a little frustrating when you're looking at numbers and reports, is how accurate were they? Especially if you remember this is in the middle of the polygamy movement and some families were hiding. So trust those numbers with a grain of salt.
I'm kind of thinking though, for the time, I know it probably sounds bad to say, but maybe for the time it was not so important to be well schooled, because we're kind of thinking about it based on our life now. That wouldn't fly today. But back then, life was so simple, and they were just starting, and their big focus was agriculture and building up a community. So they probably didn't need to be literate in Shakespeare and know how to do calculus.
So
like we might need to do that.
yes, there's actually a really good article by Charles Peterson, and he looks at the schools and how kids were taught and whether or not they needed to be in school or what like the perceptions around it were. And yes, they were subsistent farming. But he also kind of makes this point that the parents themselves didn't necessarily care, some of them, if their kids were in school, because if it was too sectarian and it wasn't religion, then it wasn't necessarily something that they wanted their kids to learn. So there was a little bit of pushback because at the end of the day, the prophet's words were more important than maybe classroom learning. And that's part of the shift that we see happening here. But they also points out that kids who learned that if mom and dad needed a chore done, that often they'd be like, hey mom, you need me to do this, right? So they could get out of class. So dedication to school is not consistent across families, it's not consistent across students, for certain.
Well, that's not only in the 1880s.
No.
I don't believe my grandparents, any of the four, ever graduated from high school.
No. It actually would have been incredibly common just to get to an 8th grade education from this time period, at max. And again, it's not until 1890 that it's compulsory to be in school. So up until then, if you go to school, you go to school. If you don't, you don't. So
People probably had trades at that point. It was probably more crucial for them to learn that trade than it was to be learning.
that's what a lot of the parents felt, yes. But we see that as the generations pass, the kids themselves are desiring more of that schooling. Ruth?
You know, my grandfather was a school teacher, and when he started out, because he graduated from high school, he could automatically teach school. So he graduated from high school in Salt Lake, went out to Tooele,
Yep.
and taught school.
Yep. Because that was more education than most people ever got. If you got through high school, that was like pretty great back then. So, all right. So, while it's not necessarily equal learning across the board, some students really do get into it. They love it, but they also, some of them have some fun. So I wanted to bring that in there because I don't know about you, but when I look about my school days, that's the part I want to remember. So that's the part what I wanted to leave you off with, okay? So here's Edward H. Snow. He says, I went to school to Schultz in the 3rd Ward. One day we had a fight or battle with green gourds. We carried the war from the playground into the schoolroom so that when school convened at 1 o'clock, the room was literally covered with gourd rinds. We were identified as the guilty ones and made to pick up every scrap. Each of us had a strip of about 10 square feet to clean up. I love it. I'm like over here, they got like a squash or a pumpkin, and they're just like, I don't want to get hit with one of those. That was like some roughhouse play. I love it. All right, so this is coming from Cedar. This is William H. Palmer's story, okay? So I have some interesting recollections of pranks that were played at the old Stake Academy days. So this is when he's moved to Parowan Stake. So he's in his teens, okay? One of my brothers had a fine trotting horse, and he brought here the first pair of hair clippers that ever came to Cedar. He used them to trim the horse's fetlocks and legs. When spring came, I used them a great deal in clipping the hair of the kids in school. One day at recess, Bud Lay and I ran down to have his hair cut. We thought we could get it all over with and back during the recess period. I got the sides all done and most of the top. There was a space running along the top of his head that was not clipped. When the bell rang, I dropped the shears and we ran for school. He was such a sight, and it demoralized the school for the rest of the day.
Is that what a mullet is?
I think he gave him a mohawk. And it was not chic. All right, so that is my presentation. Any questions? And thank you for being here.
These days, would teacher pay the same statewide based on degree and how many years you've been teaching? So a teacher with a master's degree and 10 years experience will make the same in Iron County as Washington, as...
Not necessarily. It's going to be based off of probably something more like Coupa, which is just this is your title and here's your standard of medium wages, but it's going to adjust for cost of living.
Oh, it does?
Cost of living is going to be way more expensive in St. George than Parowan.
Oh, okay.
So,
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions for Kathleen? We would like to thank you very much for
thank you.
coming. And we hope that you all take a few minutes and go up through the museum. We actually have a little education section up in room 7 that shows pictures of our local schools. the St. George Academy and the Woodward and some of the publications there. So thank you again. And next month, our presentation, and I say next month, it's in 2 weeks because it's December the 6th. It's going to be John Green giving us the history of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And he's a member of that, I believe, right? Yeah. Thank you again for coming, and we hope to see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I will unplug.